All right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. It's COMP397, summer 2016, and it's week 12, part 1 of our broadcast. Now, this is kind of funny. I'm actually broadcasting on Tuesday. We normally have class on Monday, but there was no class on Monday. So I figured I'd kind of put together a little addendum recording for us. Let's see if I can get some of this stuff done. Can't promise I'll record for 3 hours, but we'll do what we can. All right, start off. Let's see where we are today. So far, I'm using our code from last day. I'm just going to close some of this stuff down since we don't need to use all this. These are all the open files we have right now. We're using the current code from our GitHub. I'm just going to pump out GitHub for a second. So if I look at github.com/Centennial, and then if we go to Mail Pilot, so we're doing COMP397 Mail Pilot from about 8 days ago, okay? If I go to that repository, you can see that we have 2 releases, right? One of them was 0.1. That was the first kind of pre-release we kind of came up with, and 0.2. I'm working on 0.3 if I go to code. And if you look at our branches, we have 3 branches, 0.1, 0.2, and 0.3. I'll be working on branch 0.3 today and see how much of this I can get done. I'm going to add a few more issues as well, because I want to make sure we get some of these things done. Okay, let's go back to issues for a second. Okay, add assets to sprite sheet. Again, recommended. Using texture packer, we want to do that for sure. Player's avatar to have animated propeller. We want to try and do those kind of things today if we can. Island goes outside of bounds, still a bug. Not sure if I'm going to adjust that today if I can. Add config class for screen so that we can remove hard-coded screen-related values. Maybe if we get to that later on, but those 2 for sure. This is a lot more difficult than it looks, the sprite sheet stuff. Only because of, well, not more difficult, just longer. So let's take a look at this. I think the other thing I want to add is web fonts, right? So I'm going to add a new issue. And I want to add web fonts to project. That's what I want to use. So I can use web fonts anywhere I like. And I'm going to say this is a new feature. It's not, well, maybe it's an enhancement. Let's get rid of that. We kind of really have fonts already. And I'll put it onto milestone 0.3. Again, we might decide to make milestone 0.4. In fact, just to keep things going, let's go back to issues here. Did I actually do that? Yay, submit new issue, Tom. Let's do that first. Okay, and if I go back to issues and if I go to milestones, I want to make a new milestone, and I'll say version 0.4. I'm going to push off one of those bug fixes until then, because just, you know, times are what they are. I don't have a lot of time right now today. See if I can do this for at least a couple of hours. Wait a minute. Go back. I meant change the milestone to 0.4. 0.4. And there we go. So we have one milestone for 0.4. Okay, let's take a look. So I don't have a lot to do today, only because of the time, but I wanted to kind of put these 2 up so you can certainly follow along with me if you want to. All right, going back to here. So what all do I have to do to put this stuff together? First of all, how does sprite sheets work? So let's pull up our documentation. So if I go to easel.js, okay. If I look at documentation for easel.js, which is under docs, you can see that we have sprites, the sprite class, and the sprite container, and the sprite sheet. I definitely want to use sprite sheet. So what do I need? I need images, right? So basically, you've got our image, and then inside there, I have path to the image, whatever it is, and then each image produces a set of frames. So here's the frames. Let's take a look at this. So frames works like this. I have the width, the height, count, it says, how many frames, regx and reg-y, so you can actually center x and center y, spacing, and margin. That's all the stuff that I have here under frames, right? So there's frames for you. And it kind of looks like this. So there's 2 frames here of animation, right? There's this one, as an example, 0, and there's frame 1. So frame 0 and frame 1 as an example of this, right? here's some animations. I'm using sit. It says for a single frame animation, you can simply specify the frame index. In this particular case, the sit animation happens on frame 7. Okay, interesting. Okay, and here's another one. Here's animations, and then run, and then jump. Run starts at 0, and then ends at 8. So start at animation frame 0 and ends at 8. Jump does 9, 12, then does the run animation, and then hits number 2. Right, so it goes back to number 2. So that's definitely how it works. So we can also indicate frame rate for each animation, and that's how it goes. So here's an example of that. So I've got a data, and I've got my images. So in this particular case, it's called sprites.jpg, a sprite sheet. And then we have some frames, right? So width 50 by height 50. And here's my animations, right? Now, one thing we need to do when we have to know this is we have to put together a sprite sheet with a new sprite sheet object. And each sprite, right, that uses the sprite sheet calls the animation that it wants to run. In this particular case, it calls the run animation using frames 1 through 5. Okay, 1 through 5. So very interesting. Now this is all nice and it's beautiful. The problem is doing this stuff, all this stuff that is talking about manually, is a little bit crazy. So we're going to use a little application called Texture Packer to help us out. Let's take a look at, first of all, what a sprite is itself. So if I go to sprite class, here's how it goes. I have a new instance of the sprite class, right? And I pass in the sprite sheet that's related to it, and then I create my sprite. Yay, very easy. And then I can say, hey, go to my instance and go to and stop. Play this frame, whatever the frame name is, and play it, and go to and stop to the frame name. Nice, okay. So that's really it in a nutshell. It does extend the display object class, but is 100% different than the bitmap. So if you notice, it just takes 2 objects, the sprite sheet, and then an optional frame or animation count, if you will. That's what we're going to be doing with our sprite sheet. Okay, and there's several methods on the sprites that you can do. You can add an event listener. Let me see if I go to the index here. It tells you all the methods. Really cool methods here. Play, you can play the animation. You can go to and play, right? So you can skip from one animation to the other. Go to and stop. Go to and play means it will keep playing. Go to and stop will play the animation and then stop the animation. You can stop the animation itself. You can also have an event listener that listens for the animation to end, that event, and so on. Or if the animation changes from one animation type to the other, you can list these things and it'll continue to go. So that's how animation is triggered, and those are the classes for the animation. So again, let's go back to that sprite sheet for a second. Here's sprite sheet. So again, we're going to have to instantiate a sprite sheet object, okay, and do that. Let's take a look. So again, one thing I would do is I would, first of all, and this is all prep, by the way, before I even touch any code, I would launch Texture Packer. And again, Texture Packer is a little application you can buy. I bought mine. I haven't updated it in a while, right, because I don't need to. But this is it right here. And all you do is you drag and drop, right, your textures. Textures are sprites or images, if you will. So it says update period expired, from one side to the other. And then what it does is you can choose the data format that it outputs to. So in my case, it's going to easel.js, create.js, right? And the texture format that I want. This is the sprite sheet format, the end format that I want to go to. And you can choose several different formats. If you want to really go to different kinds, you can certainly choose these. The one I use a lot is definitely ping, the ping image that I use, or PNG, and so on. Those are the kind of options you have. This is kind of neat, right? So again, I can kind of add my sprite sheets on here, and I can also drag and drop stuff into here. I already have some stuff, but let's suppose that I'm going to go back out to the web, and or back out to my files, and I have my assets. Here's my assets, and notice I have a bunch of my assets around. And one thing I want to do is, first, let's use, instead of making the propeller work or whatever, let's make it so that I can drag and drop all the existing items onto the sprite sheet. So how would I go about doing that? So again, I could kind of add a cloud, right? So this is what my spreadsheet looks like right now. And then I'll take other things. For example, my island. I want to add my island in there. And I can also add things like my exit button. Oh, someone's sent me a Slack message already. So I can send the different buttons in play as well. So we've got our, like I said, our exit button, and we have our next button here, as well as the restart button. So all the buttons can definitely be added in there. Oops, not all those. There we go. And then the other thing we're missing is our plane. Now I'm going to grab, just for our example, plane 1, plane 1, plane 2, plane 3. And you'll see what these all are for now. Or maybe I'll just grab the plane, then I'll add the other one. One thing I'm not going to do is grab the ocean. I talked about this last time. Ocean is fairly large. So this is really our sprite sheet right now. And notice how it arbitrarily just planted all these things on the sheet itself. So the sheet is one image. That's what it is. And I want you to consider this almost like a texture map, with each of these images, these other ping images, being considered quote unquote textures. That's what they are. So they're textures on our texture map. Okay, cool. So we've got this. And what I want to do is I want to publish this sprite sheet. All right, I want to publish this sprite sheet. It's going to ask me some names. So if I click publish, it's going to say, hey, so where do you want to put this thing? Well, I definitely want to put it under assets images. That's where it's going to go, where I got this thing. So it's on the same map. Now I already have something called Atlas, but I'm going to call it Atlas for now. Here's my Atlas ping. I'm going to overwrite my images. And by just to be sure this is the right one, because I don't want to overwrite something that I already did. Let's keep going out here one more time. So let's go to desktop. Yeah, see, it's not in the right place. And it's often easy to make a mistake like this, but you want to make sure that it's going to the right place. So this is where I got it from. So I'm going to go to assets, images, and I'm going to call it Atlas. That was a good name, but it's just it was going to the wrong place. So this is my Atlas. Yay. Okay. And I'm going to save. Now what it's going to do, it's going to publish everything here. And hopefully it's going to go to the right place. And this is where it writes the sprite sheet to. And it tells you how large it is. It's 430 by 232. Now, why do all this stuff, right? Why bother? Why even use texture packer? Why even use sprite sheets at all? I'll show you in a second why it's so beautiful. So if I look through here, now I have an Atlas. Here's my atlas.ping image, right? And if I double click on it, it'll bring it up in our favorite Fireworks here, or whatever editor you feel like using, graphic editor. Notice this is the sprite sheet, and you have some details. If I click onto it, 430 by 230. And this is how it's done. You can see if I really wanted to, I could probably figure out where the beginnings of these objects are, right? So for my start, my next, my restart, all these things, all these buttons and so on. But it's really challenging. I mean, it might be off, like in terms, I mean, I can draw a rectangle around these things and kind of figure out where the top left corner is. But, you know, it's a little hard to do. But what texture packer does, and if I was going to open this up, this atlas.json, I want to open this up inside Visual Studio Code here. Let's take a look and see. So under my assets, under images, I now have this atlas.json file. Here it is. And this is what it generates for you. It says, hey, you know what? Your images comes from this atlas.ping. Now, you got to figure this is wrong, right? This is dead wrong. And why is this dead wrong? It's wrong because atlas.ping is not a relative path. It's just, well, it's relative to my images. So yeah, so my ping image is relative to where it's at, images. But what I got to put in here is what's relative to the index.html page. So it's got to go like this. So kind of under assets, images, atlas.jpg. Well, ping, and we'll see this. Now here are all the frames. So what it does, it takes a look at the first frame, which in this particular case is the cloud frame. That's frame 0. And you can see that it goes 1, 1. This is where it starts off. This is the width and the height, 226 by 178, and the rest are kind of offsets that we don't have to use right now. But if you look at this thing, 1, 1, 226, 178, it tells you the positions of these sprites on the sprite sheet. It does it all for you. And it also mentions which one of these frames, as an example, each one of these frames, what they mean. So, for example, cloud would then mean frame 0. Island would be frame 1. So right now, we're not actually using animation. We're just using a sprite sheet to indicate which one of my textures are related to the frame, right, on my texture sheet or texture atlas or sprite sheet. So that's what I want to use these things for. Warning, right now, if you notice, I'm going to load my assets images atlas.ping, and I'm not going to use my preloader. And we'll get to that later, one thing at a time. All right, let's go back. So first of all, now that I have this, right, I want to use this as my texture atlas. Okay, let's go back to my core here. Let's take a look at this. So what am I doing first off? In my core so far, I've got my asset data. Here's my asset data. And I've got it right here. Now, eventually what I want to do, right, and notice that this is all, I have to change my stuff back to this because this is going up 1, up 2. That's probably what it's going to say in my atlas, right? That's what it's going to say. It's going to say the relative path is actually relative to the, not to the HTML page, but to the JavaScript page, right? So there it is. So assets, images. And you know, when I copy this over, I don't need this part because this is just some stuff from Texture Packer to let us know where it came from, this stuff, right? Which we really don't need. We can certainly use it, but we don't need it. Okay, so I'm going to save this part. Now, I'm not going to access my JSON file directly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this stuff. I copy this whole object, so copy. And I'm going to go back into my core game.ts file. And what I want to do here is I want to create another object. So we make some room for this. This is where I have my asset manifest for my images and sounds, but I want to make another one. I'm going to kind of go down in here, and I'm going to say, you know, let my texture atlas, that's what it is equal to, and then I'm going to kind of paste in my atlas. There it is. All right. So now if I look over this, you can see that TypeScript is trying to make heads or tails of what I just did. So I hover over this and it says, well, it's kind of interesting. It says your texture atlas is an amalgam of an image string array, a bunch of images, some frames, right? So for example, I have with a multi-dimensional array of numbers. That's what it is, right? So an array of arrays, equivalent. A property called animations, which include all the images related to an array of numbers. That's what it is, right? And let's take a look. And is that true, really? At the end, I guess. So yeah, so there's an array of numbers, right? Pointing it to the first element in the array, or 0, whatever that is, right? So if I look over here, I can see that it relates to this. And sure enough, frames is an array of arrays. An array of arrays of numbers, which is interpreted as a multi-dimensional array. So an array, so this will be equivalent to frame 0, right? Frame 0 being an array of numbers. Okay, that's how it interprets it. So that's my texture atlas. That's my texture atlas. That's at least what I've called it right now. Okay, so how do I incorporate this? I mean, I've got my manifest that I load. I do this. Then I come here, and after I load my manifest, away I go, right? Because I got my preloader going on and everything else. And then what I want to do in here is I want to put in, so after I'm done my preloader, after I've finished doing this stuff, right, I'm going to hit my init function, which is going to do the stage stuff. And probably in here, between my create.js ticker and stage, for now, this is what I'm going to put in my texture atlas for now. Now, there's a reason for this, because I want my texture atlas all my images finish loading before I use them. For now, though, we're not going to use a preloader, but we're going to put it in here anyway, as if we'd never used the preloader at all. We can turn that off for a second. Okay, what do I mean? Let's go back to our documentation. So remember that we're going to go back to easel.js, and we're going to see how this works. So we got our texture atlas, and if you notice, we have our data. This is our data, almost in the exact same way, right? And we got images and so on. And what I want to do, because images is just an array, an array of of images that I've got here, right? Which I'm only using one, right? If I go back to our Visual Studio Code, you can see that again, I've got the same kind of idea. Here's our images. So one string of images. I can certainly try and preload this one, right? But here's the thing, right? I want to be able to reference this image, right? And this is where the difficulty is. Here's my ID for images. I'm going to have to decline you, my love, because you're trying to get to me. I have to decline. So this is where I load, but notice that I use a friendly name for the images that I'm using if I use my preloader. So couldn't put that there because for me to get the images in here, I got to use something like, and this is just how I'm telling you, this is how it works. Images, I got to reference the load queue, which is assets, right? .get result. Remember I did that, assets.get result, and I load up this stuff, and then I can do it this way. So I can't quite do it this way. It needs to refer to this string. So for now, it's okay. I'll leave it as is, and I'm going to refer to the texture atlas itself as the data that I need. Okay, now we might call the whole thing texture atlas. Let's go back. Because our sprite sheet, we're not going to call it sprite sheet, obviously. The sprite sheet is our texture atlas. And this is just the data for our texture atlas. So maybe what we'll do is, instead of calling it in this particular case texture atlas, right? Maybe we'll call this atlas data, just for now. So we'll say atlas data. So the difference between asset data and atlas data. Asset data, of course, is for our asset manifest that we're preloading with, and atlas data is for our texture atlas that we're using right now. Okay, that's it. So now that we've got that, we're going to go back in here, and we're going to definitely install our an object that's on the global scope, right? Well, on the functional scope here. And if you notice that we already have some assets, and one of them is for our scene. We have scenes, scores, and everything else. There's our assets. And just around this, for reference to our preloader, we probably want to make a reference over here to our sprite sheet. So declare sprite sheet, our texture atlas. Right? Now remember, our texture atlas, we're going to export this one because we're going to need to access it later on, is, if I just say texture atlas itself, is a type of sprite sheet. So create.js .sprite sheet. That's what it is. Now remember, we're just declaring the reference to the sprite sheet right now. We haven't really instantiated it as of yet. Okay, in order for us to instantiate the sprite sheet, we're going to have to go down in here, and where it says just after our ticker, we're going to have to use that same code that we see here. So again, var, we've done this part. So our texture atlas is equal to a new create.js sprite sheet, right? And we're going to pass in the data, which is our atlas data. Okay, so let's do that. So again, texture atlas is equal to a new create.js .sprite sheet. There we go. And we're going to pass in atlas data, which passes in everything we need for the sprite sheet to work. So basically, we take the atlas data, this object, and pass it into the sprite sheet to make this complete. So you can see that now, our sprite sheet has all the data we need to use. Okay, now good. So that's number one. So how do I use this thing now? So now that my sprite sheet's there, remember, each sprite then, this would be the sprite right here, has to pass in the sprite sheet itself, which would be our texture atlas, and then the animation that I need, or the name of the animation I need for here. So this is the change that I need to make to my global game object that we made, right? My game object, in order for us to use the sprite sheet data as opposed to everything else. Now, for now, what I'd like to do is, that means that all the stuff that we have in here, other than the sounds, we have sounds, these sounds here, and we also have our ocean. We're not going to include this one, but island, plane, cloud, thunder, and all this stuff here, start button, we don't need it anymore. Okay, so we're going to get rid of it because we're not preloading this. Eventually, we're going to preload one sheet. But for now, we're going to get rid of all this. Right, so we want to do things in one step at a time. They're going to say, oh, no, this isn't going to be any good, Comp, because, you know, we're not going to have access to this stuff. But yeah, we will, because we're going to load it up in a spreadsheet. So our assets right now that we're preloading are smaller. Ocean, definitely preloading that on its own. Thunder, yay, and engine is the sounds, right? Now what we need to do is we need to make a change to the way we, our objects, if I go to objects, and if I go to game object, here's our game object.ts. Our game object.ts file is slightly different, right? Before it was extending our create.js bitmap. Can't do that anymore. We got to extend our create.js.sprite. There's a sprite. All right, cool. So that's the main change here. We got to change our game object to use a sprite instead of a bitmap. Going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem because if I look at our constructor, the superclass does not look for that at all. It looks for the sprite sheet name, right, and the name of the image. Oh, this doesn't change. That's why I kept the image string there, by the way. That was my own selfish reason for doing that. But so then this would reform to look like this. So get rid of this. We still need the image string because that's the second part of it, right? That's this part. That's the framer animation, right? And then we need the sprite sheet, which is just core.textureAtlas. We're going to fix these problems later on. We may decide to make a asset manager class in order for me to do that, but that's it. Everything else remains the same. So here's our texture atlas, and now each object, each image that is part of our, our objects here, like, for example, if I go back to, now remember Ocean does not do that. Ocean never extended our game object class, right? Doesn't actually do, this is actually wrong. It doesn't extend anything. It extends create.js bitmap. That's all it does. That's what it extends. Whereas everything else, for example, our player class does extend our game object. So there's nothing changed here. The player class and the cloud class, all those things don't change. The only thing we need to change is our game object. So that way it creates a sprite that we use the sprite sheet for. Okay, cool. So that's a lot of little changes. Let's see what we've changed. We've changed our Ocean because we just updated the content there, the comments. Game object has changed. Our game.ts changed because we added it in. We added in a atlas.ping file and an atlas.json that we're not going to use, but this definitely we'll use. Okay, and let's add a new thing. So we'll say added texture atlas and changed game object to use it. And this closes issue. Do we have an issue for that? Number. Let's see if I can do this. Issue number. And let's see what the issue number is. If I go to GitHub for a second. And I probably don't see it, but let's go to milestones for a second. There we go. So if I go to issues, so it says assets, add assets to sprite sheet recommended texture packer for enhancement, which is what I did, right? So that's really it right there. And that issue is number 14. So I'm going to go back to this one, number 14, and I'm going to kind of do one of those. And I want to, this is going to go to 0.3, so let's go to push. It's going to push this change to 0.3. Yay. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at the GitHub. And I want to see, less than a minute ago, I pushed to 0.3. If I want to look at 0.3, I can see added texture atlas and so on. It added this into my assets images. There we are. There's the JSON atlas and the atlas ping image. But again, we don't really preload this yet. Okay, that's not what we're doing yet. We're just loading up to see if it works. Okay, well, we have a version of the code up here, and I'm running it with Light Server, right? And I need to refresh it just to make sure. Well, we're pretty good already because after we made those changes, right, we should be okay. But remember one thing. One thing we haven't done, even though I've changed all this stuff, is I haven't run my build settings. So I'm going to kind of run this for the first time. That should revamp this. And I'm going to refresh this page for a second. And we're going to see a problem. Let's see what the problem is. Let me inspect this problem out. We'll do some troubleshooting here. Console. Uncaught type error. Cannot read property width of null. Okay, button.ts. Because buttons use this as well. It's trying to find the button. It says localhost scripts objects button. Cannot read that. Cannot read the update of all these things up to the game.ts. Notice it says uncaught type error cannot read property update of undefined. So a bunch of stuff that's undefined here. We got to find out why in a second, because everything was working before we went to that. But when I go to my button class itself, let's take a look and see what I've done. And this is, by the way, super important because a lot of times it's just not finding the sprite sheet. And that's why it's doing what it is. And that's counting errors here. So if I go back to sources, and if I look and see what this looks like, let's take a look at the index.html here. Okay, so nothing changes here. So config, scene, objects, ocean, all this kind of stuff, nothing changes here because we're not doing anything differently, right? But like I said, one of the big challenges were that script, our core game.ts script, where is this looking? This is what it looks like right now, so we can confirm what it's doing. Where is this looking where it's loading in our sprite sheet? Because remember, we are instantiating a new sprite sheet after everything has loaded, right? So everything's loaded, and then we're doing this. Texture, new, create.js sprite sheet, blah, blah, right? So the thing to do is to actually do a little bit of console out right here to find out what it is. And I can do it right here, but I want to do it in my code. So I want to kind of do some troubleshooting and see what's going on. And you're going to get this sometimes because you think it's supposed to be one way, but actually it's doing something else altogether. The other thing is, let's make sure that my atlas is only relative to what we're doing in here, right? So even if I was to let's just format everything just so that it works fine. There you go. Just to make sure that what's happening here, again, if you go back up to this, these things should load, ocean should load, right? Because I'm not stopping that from happening. So my ocean should definitely come up. So why isn't that coming up? And let's see if I get back to this point, like what's happening here. So the only thing I've changed is my texture atlas, right? Which is a new sprite sheet, passing in my atlas data. And let's do a console.log. I'll pass in my texture atlas here. I should get my ocean, right? The only thing I'm not getting is my buttons because my buttons aren't being loaded, right? So that's one thing that's not happening because my buttons on the first page are crashing. It could be because the way I set up my path. This could be the issue right here, and chances are it is. But let's just see, right? So again, I save this, and what it's going to do, of course, is it's going to go back to here. And if I go to console, we're going to launch. Oh yeah, it's nicely crashed. Let's just do one of these, and we'll go light-server, which will launch my game again. Now, but again, one thing it'll give us is when it gets there, if I go to console, you can see that I've got this object here, this object. And I'd love people to read that thing. But you see, even if I go in there and I go, hey, right, it's going to give me this thing. So I want my texture atlas. So that's what I want, texture atlas. And I can't get it from there. But what if I go to core-texture atlas? I want to be able to definitely read what that is. And it tells me listeners null, capture, complete, true, frame weight 0, animations array. So it gets all that information. Like all that stuff was all good, right? Okay, that's just for now. Let's disable and this is what's happening here. I want to disable the mail pilot, the buttons in the first mail pilot. So the first scene, because I'm not, again, I'm going through some of this stuff. And if I was to just try and guess to see what the problem is, and you can see that it's pointing to game my game, 125. Don't listen to that. As an example, this is not showing me what I want to show me. Let's just refresh for a second, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if I want to get in there, because I'm getting all these errors, right? As an example, I can't get any additional code handling because of the errors that I'm getting, right? So game 108. So if I go back to here, and if I look at 108, it's doing this out. No problem. I'm doing all the rest of this stuff. But when it comes to my scenes, I'm just going to change the scene temporarily. So in my menu scene, especially, what I want to do is I want to instantiate an object. The ocean's cool because that hasn't changed anything. But what I want to do is this button, my start button, and I'm adding a child, this start button. What I want to do here for sure, right, for my button class is I want to just comment this out for now. Because if I don't, what happen is this is the problem. I'm not seeing a start button. I probably want to do one of those. And the start button is broken over a couple of, okay, so I'll kind of bring that out. And I'll save that one, which will update everything else. And I should see the ocean now. And I also see this. Now I did this on purpose. I didn't do it because this fixed the problem by any means. What this does allows us to inspect this. Right? So here's our animations. There's our data object. Right? Here's cloud, exit button. It tells you all these objects are here. So this is all good. Right? But one of the problems are that, and frame rate is 0. We don't need any of this stuff. Here's our images, and we got 1. Right? And if I go to my image array, I want to see what this image is. And it's trying to read up. So this is my animations array. So these are all the things. So it read everything. Everything I kind of passed into there, it read. So, but it's giving me an error, right, with the button. Okay, why is that? Let's go back to button for a second, because remember, button is button a game object. And that's, I kind of said that, we're making a sprite. We didn't say that button's a game object. And that could be the issue. That could be the problem that's causing all this problem, right? So I go back to objects, and if I look at my button, and if I look at what this is, well, no, button extends GradeJS bitmap. Well, okay, how could I fix button so it'll work? Well, I gotta do this and change GradeJS Sprite. Now, I don't want to make button a game object for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't need to be so heavy, number one. And the second thing is that we can kind of change this pretty quickly to go core dot extra atlas, and then we pass in an image string to the button, and there we go. That's all we need to do for this one. So it's only a couple changes. I forgot to do that, and that was probably the reason why I did that. Let me go back to my, just to check this out, I want to go back to my, my menu scene. So go back to objects, there you go. And then under, collapsing these for a second. I'm going to go back to scenes. I'm going to go back to menu, and then take all these things away. So I'm going to get the button back. All right, so again, I want to get this button, put this back. Right. And these are the things that I kind of took out that I want to put back in. So, okay, so these are all back. And now, if I go back here, still runs, and I've got myself a button. That's a good sign. That means that we actually put the right path in there, but the button wasn't really a sprite. Okay, good. So let's take away that, go back to my core, and where it says game.ts, and we're going to get rid of our little console log, because we don't want to pollute my stuff with console logs. So this one's got to go. Now, maybe some comments to kind of say added texture atlas, right? Yeah, that's right. Now we're going to replace this texture atlas. Right now we've got this, and the reason why I do it like this is because I can always replace the data with other data, but we know that this is the correct path. This is the correct path. Again, if I was going to try and preload it, how would I do that? The preloading stage happens beforehand. I have a friendly name for the preload. Then in here, I got to put something like, something like assets dot get result, and then the name of the data, which would be Atlas. And if I was to try it out, and first of all, let's see what we got before I do that, to show you that it doesn't work exactly that way, because it is an array, right? Okay, there we go. There's this. So if I refresh, if I click on start,
yay,
everything is beautiful as before. Everything's beautiful as before. And the reason why it's beautiful as before is because it's using sprites instead of bitmaps now, and now I can move into doing animations. And again, it's one image. Okay, this is nice, it's beautiful. So again, back to this. How do I preload it? So I probably want to preload it, one of the first things I do before all my other stuff. So just make a space for it. Okay, here it is. And we'll call this thing Atlas, right? Which makes sense. You can call it Texture Atlas or Atlas. This is the path, so that's not easy. That's not difficult to do. So we'll just copy this path, and we'll put it in here. So that's correct. So it'll preload the Atlas. But how do what do I put in there, right? How does that work out? And that's a problem, because Atlas itself gets defined right here. And, well, it doesn't, at this particular stage, it doesn't really have, I can't really go in there and do anything with it. So either I put it inside, after my preloader, inside my init function, I kind of define my Atlas. And by the way, you can read it from a file as well. It's another file load, but yes, you can. But, okay, so it has to happen before this, and in here, where I define this big object, and this is, again, pushing me to do things at a, with an actual object level. But this needs to be in the same context. It can't be here, right? Because, well, I can't do what I want to do. An example of this would be, I want to replace this with assets, get result. That's what I want to do, right? And the name of the asset, which would be Atlas. Okay? Now, again, I'm using a function to return a string, and that's what this thing is going to do. And if I go back, hover over this thing to see what I get an object. Is it a string object that I'm getting? No, I'm not getting that. That's another thing I got to watch. I got to convert this to like a string somehow. So let's see what I get now. So if I try to run this thing and I go back, man, I get this error. Let me inspect to see what I'm getting. Again, going back here, I'm getting this thing that says, cannot read property result, get result of undefined because, well, it's not defined yet. So that's not going to work. Let's go back. So I could take this whole let statement, because remember, let tells me that it's going to be kind of put in this exact spot. Right? So I could take this whole thing, copy it out, right? Because I don't really need it to be public. I do need it to be here before my Atlas. This Atlas has to be here. So I could put it in the functional space just before my init. So I could do this. I do that, format my code. Now, for sure, I know that asset's what it is, and I'm going to get to the init after the assets are preloaded, so therefore, chances are, we will know what assets are. But if I go back out here, wait a minute.
yay.
This is good news, right? This is good news. This is what I need to do, this preloading stuff. And I like this because basically what this does is it preloads the asset. So I get the asset from the result that I've loaded, and I preload my Atlas, so I don't have to worry about this. But, well, it's a lot of data that I got to store right in here, right inside my method here. And I probably want to, define my data, my Atlas data somewhere else. I could do this for now. This has to be done in this method because it has to, my init method has to be called after, right, the preloader is done. Otherwise, and this is done on an event. So the event waits for the loading to be done. When it's complete, then it calls the init function. This is good. This is the order. So this definitely has to be called second. But this, we got to figure this out. This is kind of ugly to me, right? Although it works great. So now assets use the asset that's been preloaded. All right, so we've done a couple changes. Let's go back here. What I've done is had to update. This is actually a bug. I had to update asset data. Or, well, I had to add, sorry, it was something I could have probably put asset data. Sorry, atlas data to preloader. That's what I did. And updated button class as sprite. That's really what I did. Gonna do that and push. Okay, didn't really kind of hit any issues, and I probably should have made an issue like that. Just for the essence of time here, this is what this does. Okay, so we've kind of accomplished some of it. And if I go back to, I guess I close it off. Let's go back to, let's open up a new window. And I want to go to GitHub for a second. And I want to go to Centennial. Go back to here, you can see that MailPilot. You know, I've got the latest version. If I go to 0.3, everything is working. I got a couple of commits for this particular branch. And what this does is it definitely adds my atlas and everything else to my sprite. It definitely uses everything that I want. But I've got this texture packer, and I want to make my plane animate. That's what I want to do. So how do I do that? Okay, this takes a little bit of work to do to define how this whole thing happens. And first of all, in order for us to do this, we have to kind of bring up plane number 1, plane number 2, plane number 3, so we can look at them and inspect why they're the way they are. So if I kind of look at plane number 1, you can see that the propeller is on the left-hand side here, but there's nothing on the right. Plane number 2, propeller on the right, nothing on the left. Plane number 3, propeller in the middle. So it's got to go plane number 1, plane number 2, plane number 3, and it's going to keep on cycling over and over again. All right. So I need to add these 3 images to the texture atlas, and I got to update my texture atlas so it all works. How do I do that? Well, luckily, I've kept my texture atlas open. I'm going to remove this one by pressing delete, so my plane is gone. And I'm going to add in, that's why I've labeled them plane 1, 2, 3, in order, these 3 planes. Can I put them in? Now, luckily, they're in order, plane 1, 2, 3, right? But they've juggled, and Texture Packer does this, it juggles things around the way it feels that it fits best, okay? Notice that all of my buttons are now in order and all this kind of stuff. I'm definitely going to publish the sprite sheet. And it's going to update everything that needs to be done. The sprite sheet's a little bigger now, okay? Now, of course, this messes things up, and I'll talk about this in a second. Because if I go back to here, and if I go to assets, images, assets.json, there it is, right? Things have changed. So this I'm not going to use. But anything from frames, if you can see, all the way down to here, right? Oh man, look what it did. Plane 1 is 4, and then the button is 5, and plane 2 is 6, and the start button is 7, and the plane 3 is 8. Wow, what a pain. It's not really what would be, it's not really optimal here, right? I could manually realign these things, but it doesn't make any sense. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy these things, but how would you make these frames? Just take from frames and animations, copy those, and I'm going to go back into my main file, which is my game.ts, where I have my frames and animations set up here. I'm just going to replace this data. This is why Texture Packer is pretty awesome. But remember, we need to, oops, a little bit higher, Tom. Up, okay, up planes and animations. So paste and, oops. Let us code. Okay. So now, here's the thing that we want to do. We want to gather plane instead of plane 1, plane 2, plane 3. There is no more plane. I want to make plane into an animation of its own, but it takes a different format than this. And I don't have to do it in order. That's a great thing. I'll do it down here. So 4, 5, sorry, 4, 6, and 8 is what I want. So 4, 6, and 8, right? Those are the 3 frames. Let's get rid of 6. The changes, and let's get rid of 4. These things don't matter. They don't care. They're just buttons or whatever. And I want to change this to plain. Right? So plain is 4, 6, 8. That's nice. But I want to follow what it says here in my documentation state. Notice that it says, here's my animations, stand, run, and jump. How do I do an animation? Right? Like here's one, shoot. And then it has a little curly braces. So this is an object, frames, and speed. Speed is, and notice this in 0.5. 0.5 means half the frame rate. So instead of it being 60 frames per second, it's 30 frames per second. Wow. That's pretty darn fast, right? But notice it says frames there, which is what I want. Okay, let's go back. So I can make another little object and take this stuff, cut it, put it in there. And what we want is something that says frames, right, with a colon, and then one of those. And then if I go back, the speed, right, speed, and then some kind of value, like 0.5. Right now, 0.5 might be too fast. It's like 30 frames per second, or it might be too slow. We'll have to see that. But plain now defines 2 things. An animation with different frames, 4, 6, and 8. Notice how you see the same format here, and speed. There's no next, because I'm not going to do walk after I do this. And it's going to repeat. It's going to keep going, playing this animation over and over again. As long as I call the animation, remember, it could be an animation or a frame. It's going to call plain now. It's going to define a group of frames, 4, 6, and 8. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And look, you can see that 431 and 65, 6, and 8. Those are the 3 frames it's going to play. When we come back here and do it again, if we update our sprite sheet one more time, it's going to update everything as is. So I can save everything. Now, if after I've saved everything, if I go back and see if this thing is playing by looking at MailPilot, yeah, this is good. If I start playing MailPilot,
Yay.
You can see that
Yay.
the propellers are moving. And they're pretty good.
Yay.
Okay, so that's it. That's animation in a nutshell. So, wow, that seems like a lot of work, but really it's not. Again, if you were going to make some kind of walk animation, you call it walk, and you could, or call it whatever you like, and then define the frames of the walk animation, right? And then how fast it is. Usually you want to kind of match this up, this frame rate, with the number of frames divided by the frame rate. Example would be, let's say, for example, it was an animation. Let's look for an animation that's out there. So I want a sprite sheet. I'm looking for a random sprite sheet here. I'll just give you an example. And I'm looking for a sprite sheet with a number of frames. Now remember, you can always use sprite sheets online. The challenges are you have to define, right, each of these sprites. And I'm trying to find one that's there. This one. Let's look. I've used this one before. So here's a animation sprite sheet with a bunch of animations. Now there is one that looks like a walk cycle, right? And there's one that looks like more of a this is more of a run, and then it goes back to walking, and then different things. There's another one that does different jumping. So again, how many frames are this in this animation? If I thought this whole thing was a walk, lots, right? Let me go back to something that makes more sense. Here's one. Here's a walk animation, and maybe a bit of a run animation. But imagine if all of this was part of the whole walk cycle. Plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's like 30 frames of animation. So 30 frames here, right? And we have a 60 frames per second frame rate. So if I want to repeat this twice, then I would put it at 0.5. But 30 frames per second is almost like I should put it at 1, because there's, I want to kind of repeat it twice. If I put it at 0.5, that means that it's only going to be playing half as fast, right? Which may not be what I want. So 0.5, that factor for frame rate, if I go back to here, that factor for frame rate really describes how fast relative to the frame rate that I've described. And I described at the top a frame rate. Actually, it's right here in my init function, a frame rate of 60 frames per second. That's what it is, right? So half of that means like there's 30 frames per second, and then half as fast. It'll go through that. So imagine I have 3 frames, and I'm running at, 30 frames per second. How many frames do I do in a second, right? So 30 loops is what I'm talking about of 3 frames. So 30 times 3. I mean, so you got to figure how many that is. It'll loop like 10 times, right? 30 times a second, right? 30 times a second. There's 3 of those, right? So it'll actually go through it 10 times. And that's pretty fast. So again, if I was to do 0.5, again, and if it was 30, it'd be like 15 times. Okay, so that's really a very simple way of defining animation. And we'll do more animations later on. For example, when I do my explosion animation type, I can add in an explosion instead of a plane, right? And the explosion, we have some explosion graphics that I can lend you. I'll put it up on GitHub, and you can see when I collide with something, it creates an explosion, and that's a more complicated animation type. Okay, so that animation is done. Let's go back to our issues. Right, so I want to see from an issues perspective what we have left. So we got our issues. Let's take a look here. Okay, so this is really closed in a nutshell, right? So, I mean, I've already closed this off. So I'll close this issue. I definitely put in deployed. That's definitely what's happened here. And I'm going to close the issue. There we go. And now we have a couple more. So I got the propeller done. Ooh, I probably did this just now. So let's go in there. It says player's avatar to have animated propeller. I did that. So go here, and I'll say, I'll stage everything, and I'll say added simple propeller animation. Animation for plane. Closes issue number, and again, it looks like propeller issue number 13. Number 13, push. Okay, and if I go back, to here, we can see that there is, it's referenced, so I'm going to say that this is, this is deployed. This step is deployed. And then I'm going to close my issue. There we go. Okay, and from an issues perspective, I only have 3 left. 1 is for 0.4 and 2 are 0.3. You know what? I might push this off this time again to the next issue when I see you guys again next week, just from a time perspective. So go back in there. And this is a small release, so more of a patch than anything else. And I'll move this one to a different milestone. Move it to milestone 0.4. There we go. Pushing off, pushing off. Okay, almost like a backlog. And I guess I could make a backlog of issues. And we create a big backlog, and from there we take them and create milestones from them. I could do that as well. Okay, so I've got 2 bugs, and they're for 0.4. But this one, add web fonts to project. How do I do that? Web fonts could be fonts from Google Fonts. But remember, I have some fonts that I want to use. All right, I got some fonts I already have to use here under fonts. All right, and I got this font. I built these web fonts here with Font Squirrel, right? Font Squirrel. And if you were going to see where this is, what Font Squirrel is, if you actually look at Font Squirrel, Font Squirrel gives you some examples of how to use the font. You load up your fonts, and basically it generates all those things for you, all the different kinds of WAF files and OTFs and all that kind of stuff. And it also generates an example project for you to make it work. Now remember, we're going to use the our default fonts. And for me to do that, it's to show you how it's done from scratch. So let's say, for example, I've got Doc51. And I'm just going to get rid of these for now. There's an SVG as well. And I'm going to get Font Squirrel to generate that for us. I'm going to kind of move these to trash, and I'm going to upload this one, right, from doc51 is a TrueType file, TrueType font up to here. So I'm going to say, yes, I can do this, and font, I'm going to use optimal, right, recommended settings for performance and speed, right, and I want to upload my fonts, and I'm going to choose whatever font you want. So I'm going to go to my font here on my desktop. So this is COMP397, Pilot builds, and I go to assets, fonts, and I see that there's this doc51 file. Choose it, press open. Right, there we go. It's going to analyze the font. And when it's done, it says download your kit. That's how fast it is. It's beautiful. It's 243 glyphs. Doc51 is my funny font that I like to use. And when it's done, there we go. It's going to tell me where to download it. I'm going to go back to desktop. And we go to COMP397, and in here, under Assets, Fonts, here is this package, save it, and expand it. Right now, one of the things it does is it gives us a demo, gives us the fonts we need, and here's some specimen files as well, right? But it gives us the fonts we need and a couple of files. There's a WAF and WAF2, which it kind of looks at. These are the new way of doing things, right? So I'm going to take these ones out, and also it gives us an idea of how to use this stuff. So how does it work? Here's our specimen files. And it also gives us this demo sheet. So if I double click on the demo sheet, it says, hey, here's what the font will look like. Here's my sample layout. Give me how this thing. So it's definitely not a font you use in the body, this font here. And it says installing web fonts. It tells you how to do it. Here's add font face. And then it gives you the instructions on how to use it. Now, I don't have SVG because we didn't get that in the package, right? Notice that I only got WAF and WAF2 in this particular case, right? There it is. And they don't do that, but I can include or not include whatever I want. So WAF and WAF2 are the definitely fonts we can use. Notice that it says front TrueType, and I want to definitely include TrueType. And EOT, this particular case, it didn't do, but I could include those. And just because I have them, I'm going to put them back because these are all the ones I got from before. Let's just put them back. So I'm going to kind of go here and just, replace them all, put back. That's where it comes up. But one of the things, if you follow the instructions, and one of the things I'm surprised is that they took away some of the other ones, is they give you the instructions about how to do it. So this is the at font face you got to put in, and at font face basically declares where everything is. Okay, so it's my font here, and it tells you, so there's all the different versions of my fonts. It should give me more, but it even gives you a sprite sheet, style sheet for how this is done. Right, so if I was going to look at my style sheets, if I open this up with, I don't know, Text Wrangler as an example, you can see that it says add font face, and then it gives you the example of how this is done, exactly the same as what it says right here, plus a couple of things. It says font weight normal, font style normal. So those are the kind of things so I can actually copy this thing in here, or copy this thing in here, and grab everything I want. Now remember, and this is the key, the URL has to be relative to where it is inside your code, right? And I'm putting this in my CSS, and so it's going to be under fonts, right? So images, so assets, fonts. This can't be where it is, right? Because it's pointing to the CSS content folder. So I got to make it relative to that one. So let's do that. So I'm going to copy this. Okay, and then I'm going to go to where that web font is. Actually, well, we'll just go do that. So I'm going to go back to here, and we'll clean it up after. And if I go to my content under my game CSS, it's my game CSS. And at the top, this is before everything else, before your body tag or anything else. This is where you want to put all your font declarations. So there's that font face. My web font is called, again, Doc51. Oops. Doc51. So I want to call it something that makes sense. There's Doc51. And in here, you want to have the paths of where this stuff is. Now, this doesn't make any sense. It's because we're inside content. I'm going to go up one to the main root, then down to assets. So up one, down to assets, down to fonts. So 1, down to assets, right? And then down to fonts. Type. And it's not web font, obviously it's doc51. So if I was actually going to look in there, because this is where it's going to go, it's doc51.eot, la la la, right? So doc51. So, and lowercase doc51, which is important. It's got to be exact. So where's doc51? And I want to carry this next piece by copying and pasting. So copy, and then EOT with a prefix. It's important for us to do that too. There it is. Embedded type, WAF. So you can see that it's WAF there. WAF type. And the same thing goes with web font, true type font, and as well as SVG, which I also have in there as well. So doc51, you get all the different fonts in there, save. Okay, so that's good. I like that. Not quite done. Not quite done. We don't need this anymore. This is just for specimen. The size, just to show you how I got it. And now we don't need all this because I just did this for you so you can see how I got it done. There we go. And if I look at my, and there's different font generators out there, by the way, not just Font Squirrel. If I look at my content, game.css, what I want to do is I want to use that font as part of my body tag, right? That's how I want to use it. So I want to declare that as the main font for everything, right? So body and then font family is equal to whatever it's going to be. That's good. So that's the next thing, next stage. So I'm going to go over here, and then so font family is this, right? But I want to kind of do something like, so when I declare this, now this becomes available. This doc51 becomes available in my throughout my code, so I can reference it like everything else. Right? So if I save it, and as an example, if I go back into my my label, right? All the labels I defined. So let's do it for the first one. So if I go to my menu.ts, notice that I had in here consolus. Well, we don't have to use consolus anymore. We can use doc51. And if I did it right, save it, recompiles everything, and I go back to my code, should have mail pilot. There we go. Pretty awesome, right? So that's what it looks like now. For that, notice that this is giving me a bit of an issue because it has to understand what WAF is, and we can tell it to do that by giving it a little bit of a web.config file later on. For now, let's leave it alone. Okay, so this is done. We can probably stop this one too, but let's fix the rest of them. So this is that one, so menu. And then also my placing, if I want to use doc51 for whatever reason, I could go over and do that. So I can, anywhere I have consolus, this way it would be probably cool if I had it as a config, right? Could go doc51, right? Put that crazy font in there for doc51. And by the way, if it doesn't look good, you know, if it's the wrong style or whatever, you could definitely go back and change that and go back in here over doc51. Yeah, I want to use that crazy doc51 font. Add in there as well. There we go. Start button. All that kind of stuff. Save. All right, and let's see how that looks. So refresh. And let's kill this for a second. We'll start. That's pretty good.
Yay. Yay.
Oh yeah, this looks fantastic. Oh, even the numbers look good. Well, kind of a bit of a problem with this, eh? We're using some really cool text here, but our buttons look crappy. And this is kind of where it doesn't make sense, style, you know, for this thing. But otherwise, I mean, you can see how you can use any font you want here. And if you want to use web fonts, it'd be the exact same thing. Just call them up within your code. So whatever, instead of using consolus like I did, then use, in my case, doc51. But it has to be done just like I said. So under our content, under game.css, it's got to be the first thing that comes in before your body tag, because after your body tag is loaded, if you put this in, it won't work properly. And the path has to be also correct in order for this to work. Now, a couple things that it did include, of course I erased it too fast. Let's put this back. That's what happens when you do things too fast. Put back. One thing that it did include that I should talk about, that I didn't do that with our little font scroll example of fonts. If I go to fonts, and if I was to look at the specimen, the style sheet that it generated, and if I go to open with Text Wrangler for a second, one thing it did mention was font weight is normal and font style is normal. If I take these two things, I think it's a pretty good idea to put them in there as well. So copy those. And also looks at it, says it mentioned Doc51 regular. Meh, I just call it Doc51. You can call it whatever you want. But I want to put these definitely under here. So kind of font weight normal. It's definitely under the source. That's inside the font at font face section. So now this doesn't change a lot, but when I go back to my game, and if I was to refresh, there's areas where when I play, sometimes it's too crazy. It's too fat. So it's good to put that in as well. Okay, cool. So that's done in a nutshell. So then I've got this part done. I think that we've got the fonts done, the web fonts, and we've changed a bunch of files. So yeah, we should probably take that away again. We don't need those again. I was just using that as an example to show you where you get all that information, right? So we don't need this anymore. And you can see that there's all these files. Okay, so I got 10 files I'm adding in, staging all those, and I'll say updated project to add font, whatever you want to call it, and then it's closes issue number, and then let's go back to the issue number that I've got for this one, which I believe is number 19. Yeah, there I thought was 19. There we go. Closing on number 19, and then push, which closes off our project for today. So kind of a small addendum, and let's merge everything back to the main. So we'll finish all this off. So we're done. Okay, let's take a look. So what have we done? If I go back to here, right, and if I go to my issue, you can see that it references this issue. I'm going to definitely deploy this thing. So I'm going to look at my labels as deployed, do the web font thing, close the issue off, which makes my milestone complete. Okay, and if I go back to issues, milestones, you can see that this one is complete. I'm going to close off this milestone. There it is. I have my milestone 0.4 with a couple of issues that are open. We're going to add more to that next week when we get together, right? And now what I want to do is down in here, I want to kind of merge everything back because I've got everything kind of closed off. All right, so I got nothing open here, and let's just stop with this. So stop this one. Notice that says it's getting a 404 for Doc51 WAF. And well, that is a problem, isn't it? And that's why it's getting the updates. So it's called dash web font that instead of like this, so it's like dash web font dot waf. Let me fix that up here, just so that way. I thought it was something else, but it's not. Font EOT, and we're just going to grab this whole thing and fix this up because I don't want any problems for you guys. Should find all those. It's finding the true type font, but I don't want that to happen. And let us go back here and relaunch Light Server for a second to see if there's any issues. Hey, if I look at the inspector now, no issues. That's what I wanted. Okay, cool. So that's kind of a bug that I found really quickly. There's 0.3. And let's go back here and I'll say, so content, I'll say updated CSS. What is it called? Game .css with font paths. No, with proper font paths, because I was incorrect or incorrect font paths before. Push that one. So that change is done. I did that because I wanted to make sure everything was clear. Right? So now we can stop this. I'm going to clear this up. And I'm going to get, again, if I go get branch, you can see that I've got a number of branches. Right now I'm on the 0.3 branch. But I want to go get checkout, look at master. So move to the master branch. So we'll get branch. See that I'm in the master branch now. And now what I want to do, right, because I pushed all those changes up, I want to get merge, okay, 0.3. Right, so I want to get merge, grab 0.3, right, and you can see that I've got that part of it. And if I go get status, I should have on branch master, your branch is ahead of origin master by 5 commits, because those are the ones I just did. Worked in directory is clean, everything got done. And I want to go get push origin master, which merges all my changes back to the master branch. And if I go get status now, we can see that everything is good. If I go back up to code, you can see now that I've got 19 commits. We're all good now. We're at the master branch. Everything's been merged back in. And now I can go to a release. I want to add a new release, draft a new release, which is version 0.3. I still think it's an alpha release, right? Because we're kind of really out there. And we'll say version 0.3. We'll make this a pre-release, and we'll publish the release. Right, and this is based off of the master branch. So I'll give you some source code to download if you really wanted to. But version 0.3 is where we're at right now for this particular thing. Okay, so there we are. We have that. We moved to a new version. Let's go back to code. So I got 3 releases, 4 branches, 19 commits. And I think this is a great place to create locally another branch. So I'm going to say git branch 0.4, git checkout 0.4, which moves me to that branch, git branch. That's identical to the master branch at this point, right? And what I can do is if I go back over here, one of the things you can see is once I've got another branch, I can publish this branch to master, which basically adds that branch remotely. If I go back to this, and if I go to code, right, as an example, and I want to look at which branch I'm at, right, you can see that I've got 4 branches, but I'm at this v.03 alpha. That's my tag. Still part of the master branch. As an example, it's the same master branch I'm looking at, right? Here it is, but it's just the exact same as the release. And you can actually go through there and look at tags if you want to look at different ones. If I want to look at this one, 0.3, that's my release, and this is the exact same as the master branch. Or I can look at the master branch, whatever you feel comfortable looking at there, it's the same. All right, so that's pretty good. That's it for in a nutshell for us. Just a recap. We did simple animation with the propeller. That's hard to see, but if you look closely, you can see that the page flip animation, what it's doing. We're going to do some more complex stuff next day when we come back. Next day we come back will be week 13. So we'll only have which is kind of funny, we'll only have one more thing left. Also, I should probably cover another thing just before I go. If I look at courses, and if I look at COMP397, again, we're at week 12, right? Here's week 12. Week 12, normally I have as a workshop week. Week 11 and final project, week 10, I kind of do some different special topics. Let's take a look at this for a second. If I look at the final project here. So at this stage, you should have your this first piece done, which is your first draft of your game. That should be in this week, right? That was due again Monday, August the 1st. That was yesterday, right? And then this second week, what you're looking at doing, and I'm just putting it out there, is so first and second working levels of your game, right, with basic game mechanics and the scoring system. Totally doable for the number of partners that are involved. Again, please, I'd ask you, don't use my assets. Please don't try not to make a card game. That would be very bad. right? Because I've seen lots of card games. Next week, what I want to do when I get together with you guys on week 13 on the Monday, one of the things the activities, I want to get together with people physically in class. So please try and attend, so I can, kind of physically go through where you're at with your project. Let's do the following week, okay? Because we only have a couple more weeks left, and then, my friends, it's week 14, right? So, so please, let's get together next week. I'm going to put this this video, I'm going to post it up on Slack for you guys to see it as well as YouTube, so that you have all the details you need. Again, please send me a Slack message if you have any issues, and I'll see if I can answer your messages as soon as possible. All right, thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you next week.